Jonathan, it is so nice to have you back on the podcast. I'm really excited about this conversation where we're going to be getting into, a book that you're working on that explores so many dimensions of like the grief process. And so, yeah, we're going to get into it. But I guess before we do that, would you mind? I know you've done it before, but maybe for any new listeners, would you mind just kind of describing a little bit about who you are and kind of what you're up to professionally? And then we can just like jump into the conversation.
Sure. It's great to see you again, Kike. Thank
Thank
you
you.
for having me back on.
Of
Uh,
course.
that takes courage to have someone on once, but then to bring them back.
I'm a
And
glutton for punishment, I think.
you are, and you got all new graphics, you got all new streaming services, and
I'm
you've
I'm
gone.
trying to stay up with the cool kids.
I know you've gone next level, so I feel honored to be here. No, seriously, thank you. Sure. My name is Jonathan, and I'm a father of three, lost one kid in 2015, which is the kind of the animating fuel behind what we're going to talk about today, probably, and for that matter, pretty much everything in my life. I got two other boys, and been married 34, going on 34 years. Had a very full life. It's been replete with a lot of things that we had no idea would be happening. But it's been very interesting. It's not been boring. And been a pastor most of my life, though that whole thing is kind of um, started to say spewed me out. That might be, it sounds kind of a violent word, but that's kind of what's happened. Feel a bit like Jonah getting spewed out of the whale. But so that has been disturbing, but also I'm really thankful for, I'm thankful to have been spewed out of much of it. And I'm an author and help my oldest son and I run a nonprofit in Haiti. Yeah, what else? That was a rambling introduction to kind of who I am.
No, that's great, man. No, thank you for doing that. I think that's helpful for any of the listeners. I guess maybe the first place that we can start is kind of what led you to really work on this book that we're going to get into and explore. I know before we hit record, you said it's not quite out yet, and you're still trying to figure out exactly how and when it's going to get published. So maybe we can kind of get into some of those details. But maybe it would be good to just begin by telling us a little bit of the backstory and yeah, how this project came into existence.
Yeah, so well, first of all, the book, if people are interested by the time we get done talking, if I haven't ruined it, they can. The easiest thing to do would just be go to my website, jonathanfosteronline.com, and I'll have a link there because I'm going to crowdfund this thing as of this recording, starting in a few days, maybe a couple of weeks. But if they get on the kind of the pre-launch thing, they'll be able to be aware of it. Um, and then in terms of why this came to be, well, so my daughter, our oldest child, she was 20 years old. She died on New Year's Day, 2015. And that, as you can imagine, was a watershed event for us. I was already kind of processing theology a little bit different. I was a pastor at the time than probably my most of my colleagues and people in my denominational, religious world at the time. But that event was like high octane fuel that just, catalyzed a whole new set of things. And everything just kind of fell apart. And so, really, for 8.5 years now, I've been trying to pick up the pieces, not only, to work through the grief and just the personal, but for me, the theology piece, the psychology piece, the ecclesiological piece, all of it is so intertwined with who I was and who I am that it was, in many ways, I'm not trying to be overly dramatic, but in many ways, it was like rewiring my entire life. And so I've really kind of everything I've done for 8.5 years has been in one way or another attached to basically like what the hell is going on? What does this mean? Who is God? What is the divine? What is love? What is power? What does it mean to suffer? I'm not the only person, obviously, who's ever suffered. Um, so what are these huge, massive narratives that are woven through all of our stories. What does it mean? I don't know that anyone can ever, well, I'm sure no one can ever really figure it out, but there's something really meaningful and beautiful about the journey of trying to figure it out, and kind of being on that road of holding it in tension of like, oh, this is meaningful to journey through this and discover this, but also at the same time recognize, yeah, I'll probably never quite get this figured out. So yeah, it sent me on a journey. Finished up some degrees, and like we've talked about before on earlier episodes that I got to be with you on, that I've really enjoyed. But all along, I've been playing more specifically with grief, what it means with the absence of my daughter. And so then recently, within the last year, to answer your question more directly, I just began to write. And as most of the time when I write, it's mostly for me. It's mostly for me to try to, yeah, reapproach and approach. There's something about moving words and sentences around on a computer screen. I don't know what it is. It almost feels some mornings like that's what's happening inside my soul at the same
Mm.
time that I'm doing it. It's like existential Tetris or something, moving
Ooh, I
stuff
like
around
that.
to make things fit. And so I started doing that, and I kind of have all along, but I started more specifically doing that with this grief thing. And so this whole last year, especially since the completion of my dissertation last year, has been an exercise in exploring all of that and trying to figure out better what grief means and how to mourn well and how to be a healthy human being in the midst of so much stuff that I've been asked to carry.
Mm. Yeah, no, that's really good. And I know one of the things that really excited me when you first told me about this project and then we shared it, and after I read it, was that you were really wanting to think through some of these concepts within a relational framework. And even though I don't necessarily operate, kind of in like process theology officially, I think I've mentioned a lot of the training that I received in just my own person has to do with relational approaches to philosophy and psychotherapy. So I'm really excited to kind of connect with you relationally in this episode to explore some of these relational themes because that's just so important to me.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that it is, and I would be nervous for anyone in your position to be saying, "I don't believe in relationship," because especially after in terms of what you've studied and what you've been through and how and your work that you do, as you know, everything is relational, whether we want it to be or not. We import so much of the other into us, and we export so much of ourselves into the other
Mm,
that
that's
in
a great
many
way to put
instances,
it.
yeah, in many instances, it's really almost impossible to know where I begin and the other person ends, and vice versa. And what um, relational theology, you didn't mention theology, but I think you might have been alluding to that. Either way, what relational theology says is that all of that might be true of the divine as well. That we're not, like, I'm not particularly interested in this capital O, what I reference as capital O, omnipotent, outside of time and space deity that periodically acts in an interventionist kind of a way and steps in. I could be wrong, by the way. We'll see how it all plays out, and
Sure.
we'll all know maybe in a couple 100 years or something, couple thousand years. But I think it's a more interesting deity, and I think it rings more true. I think it's more intellectually honest and reasonable to assume that if there is a God, that God is deeply enmeshed with all the stuff that's going on with us, which presents a lot of problems, not the least of which is what it's done for me is it's opened the doors to the idea of a suffering God, of a God who can't fix things, but nevertheless is still, as I understand it, and as I'm wrestling with it, is still a God who might be present and very much with us in solidarity, and that means a lot to me. And I think maybe that, I'm guessing that that might be the hope of the world,
Mm.
that there is something that's just a little bit bigger than me and probably a lot bigger, but let's just say a little bit, even just something a little bit bigger than me and all of us, that is still inviting and luring and encouraging people into something good in the future. So the relational aspect opens the doors to a lot of things. And yeah, I'm glad that you're exploring it.
Yeah, no, totally. So, okay, Jonathan, the first thing that I want to kind of maybe explore is just like the title. I don't know if that's still going to be the title, but
Yeah.
you know, you entitled it Indigo, the Color of Grief. And I just wanted to start there. Why indigo? You know, what's the symbolism there for you? And I mean, I love it. And I even went back on the internet and like looked up that color and kind of like sat with it and let it kind of seep into my psyche a little bit. It's a powerful color, but yeah, maybe you could begin there. Why that color? Why the name?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, the name and the word has just been in my brain for a few years now. I just think it's a cool word. At one level, there's nothing else to it other than, oh, it has a nice little ring to it and it's just different enough. And so, you know how creative types are, they get stuck with a particular thing.
Oh
And
yeah.
that's the way it's always been. But pretty quickly, once I decided that that's what this should be called, it started to have other connotations too. Um, and I haven't completely unpacked all of that, but I know Indigo has a long history. Um, Even if you throw it into Wikipedia, you'll see some stuff pull up
Oh
that's
yeah.
pretty interesting from other parts of the world and the meaning. I love the fact that there's gradations to, it's kind of like the color purple.
Yeah.
And so even how I designed the cover of the book, it's very much about the movement and the gradation of the whole thing.
Mm.
Uh, and those two words to me are synonymous, which has a lot to do with grief, trying to process, and for that matter, being a human being and the work of individuation and differentiation as you move through things. So it meant a lot to me the more I got into it. And for a while, the subtitle was going to be like theopoetics and a color of grief, because really, I'm really interested in theopoetics. The people I read, like Catherine Keller and John Caputo and those kind of folks, a little bit of Peter Rollins maybe, are kind of like theopoets. But I finally decided that was maybe a little bit too pretentious. And most people don't know what theopoetics is anyhow. So I was like, okay, stop trying to be cool. Really, the subtitle is The Color of Grief, and it works really well. So I think the gradation piece of it and the kind of ambiguity of what color is indigo anyhow, I think that's appealing to me.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And
And
I
it's a dark shade, and grief is that dark
yes.
piece. And also, of course, I should mention there. I do mention indigo in the writing. There's a really important point in that
Hmm.
story where indigo happens, and it's right as sunset's happening. So I think all of
Right.
those things are symbolic.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. So, okay, I actually had another question about like the I guess I could say the medium in which you wrote it, right, which is a type of poetry. But before I get to that question, maybe you could maybe spend a little bit of time because I think there's going to be a lot of people that have never heard that concept, theopoetics. I think there'll be some that really resonate with it. How do you understand the whole theopoetic movement? What do you mean by that, Jonathan?
That's a good question. So, if there are any real theopoets out there listening, I may not have the classic answer, but for me, it is, simply a mashup of theology and poetry. It's the thing that lives at the intersection of art and those of us who have, um, spent some significant time trying to think about God and the divine, which for me is love. It's really thinking about love. So I don't really care what you call it. So I've always been fascinated with that. I've always been fascinated. Like theopoets, they'll be interested. I'll just speak for myself. Uh, I'm interested in getting um, to the kind of the right point, but how I get there is as important as quote unquote the right point anyhow. Richard Rohr says something interesting. What does he say? Something like, "How you get there determines where you go." And I think for my writing, that that's almost everything. Like the journey of it, the discovery of it is really important, and the beauty of how a sentence is structured and how a particular word is chosen. Now, of course, beauty is subjective, so some people will read this and be like, this guy's it's really not that beautiful, which is fine. That's the way it works. But theopoetics is interested in the way all of that plays out, and I just find that endlessly fascinating.
Yeah, Jonathan, well said. So, okay, you kind of went there a little bit, but let me kind of like sharpen the question a little bit. You know, I've read many books on the process of grief, and a lot of times they're more like prose, or sometimes they're like, we have a mutual friend, Richard Boothby. He wrote kind of a memoir processing the death of his son. I think you could have chosen a variety of different ways to kind of express your thoughts, but you chose this book. I mean, would you say it's accurate to say it's a collection of poetry or poems? Is that how you describe it, or is that me imposing kind of the way I received it?
Most people are seeing it that way. Like,
Okay,
well, yeah, poetry, poems definitely comes up. It's not the full thing. And for people who don't like poetry, I guess I'm a little bit hesitant because it's not a rhyming, kind of a thing.
sure.
The way it came about was it was two things. Number one, it's very conversational. It's so I was thinking from the beginning, I knew this had to be an audiobook anyhow.
Yeah.
And so how I would just speak it is pretty much how I wrote it.
Okay.
And then in addition, yeah, I started stripping all the punctuation and stuff out, which, let's be honest, I was going to mess a bunch of it up anyhow. So, it makes that part easier.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely got a poetry feel to it, but I don't think it can be relegated to probably just that strictly.
Okay. No, that's fair. Yeah, and again, I don't know if this is the technical way to think about it, but it was almost like this stream of consciousness. It really felt like
Yeah.
you were having an intimate conversation with me, kind of letting me peek into like the ups and downs of your psyche through this process.
Yeah, I can see why you say that, and I think that that's probably true. It is a bit stream of consciousness, though it's funny to say that because now months into it, when I've worked it and reworked it 8,000 times, it feels, but that's what I'm going for, and I think that that is probably, yeah, that's an honest way to view it.
Sure. And again, I'm now sensitive to not just wanting to reduce it to poetry, but I kind of shared this little quote with you. One of my favorite poets, David White, has this line where he says, "Poetry is language against which we have no defenses." And I shared that with you because that really was like my phenomenological experience of the text. I would read it actually in between sessions and at night, and there's still a part of me that doesn't want to be reminded of my own sadness or loss or grief. But the way you wrote it, not just the words and the content, but I think the way in which it was written sort of worked against my defenses. And I was in tears for a lot of it, and going deep into my psyche. So for that, I'm grateful, and I think it was effective.
Well, that's really kind of you to say, and that means a lot to me. I was in tears writing much of it,
Mm,
and feel like I've been in tears much of the last 8.5 years. So, um, yeah, I've definitely gotten that response too, for sure. Sometimes almost that exact thing. My friend Tim Settle, who is a intellectual and a pastor here in town. I know it's hard to imagine that sometimes those two can
those two
exist
go together.
together. It's hard. It's hard, but it happens every once in a while. And Tim said the same thing. He said, I wasn't prepared for this. He said,
Yeah.
give me a treatise, or give me something I can pick apart. But he said this, like, in so many words, went around and came in the back door, kind of a thing, and just took me by surprise. So I love that about art in general,
Mm.
and
Yeah,
I totally
I don't think it
agree.
has to be reducible to poetry. Maybe the quote could be, art is like a language against which we have no defenses. It's
Yep,
such a powerful medium.
absolutely. And that means a lot to me, and it's very congruent. That resonates with theopoetics. And so
Absolutely.
if that's someone's experience, I think that whatever's supposed to happen with this work is happening. So that's pretty cool.
Sure. I'll say another thing too. Like as I was reading it, to me, some of the most powerful parts. I mean, the parts that maybe led to the greatest amount of tears and just the strongest emotions were when you were just describing just very quotidian, ordinary things that you would do with your daughter that
Mm.
you could no longer do. And I know that to some people may sound insignificant, but as a father who's kind of in that stage of life, getting to do these little things with my children, playing chess or just that hug in the morning before breakfast, to kind of imagine not being able to do that is crushing. So I guess I'm just saying thank you for your vulnerability and even highlighting those little moments, which I think some people wouldn't even think about. But for those of us that are parents, those are the almost the strongest ones. And so
Yeah.
I knew you were really speaking from a place of authenticity and experience.
Yeah, that's cool that you noticed that. And I love how that's hitting with you because I think that's true. That, and it's true with everything in life, right? We tend to think we're waiting for those big moments. But those big moments are full of all these little moments that are happening all the way along that make them quote unquote big. So I think that's really cool. And it's great if you as a parent and me in whatever stage of my life have a new awareness of just trying to embrace the little stuff that happens every single moment, moment by moment.
Yeah, no, totally. So, okay, Jonathan, if you're cool with this, what I would love to do is to invite you to read. Again, I'm sensitive now. I don't want to call it a poem, but
Oh no, I didn't mean to say that you couldn't call it poetry, but
but
it's
but
cool.
maybe you could read. I don't know if you want to call it a chapter or just the part in the book. It's pages 89 and 90 entitled "Grieving." And I want to go there because of everything you wrote. I think it kind of encapsulates so much of your experience and how you think about the grieving process. And maybe after you read it, we could just kind of break down some of the ideas in it and yeah, just continue this conversation.
Sure, man. I would be happy to, and I'm trying to pull it up. My
Sure.
pagination is different, and I should have had
Oh,
it up.
okay.
Should have had it up for you,
No worries.
but I'm getting there. Uh, is it after the? So I got
It's
retrace
right before
chapter.
home and it's right after let's see. It's after a long one entitled Heaven.
Okay.
Or actually it might be
Okay.
after Moms too.
Yeah, there it is. Sorry.
Yeah, it's after Moms.
You can uh, you can delete some of that if you want for the
Yeah.
podcast. But okay, yeah. So the little grieving, and all these chapters are pretty short. So
Yes.
uh, this is 2 pages, and you want me to read it?
Please, would you mind? I wanted to
Yeah,
kind of experience, yeah, you reading it and then we can just kind of unpack it a little bit.
sure. Grieving is a slow arrow, a renegotiation with time, to live best one can without thinking too far ahead, the next milestones like millstones around the neck of our future, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries. It's a commitment to each day, full of grace by the hour. Grieving is redirection of power, to give one's impatience a hug, to be powerful in powerless waiting. Grieving is redefinition of attachment, to let go of letting go, to see oneself attached to the absence that does not let go. Remember random hug a girl gave a few months before death. She was a busy nursing student, papers to write, people to talk to, places to go. But as she clipped through the kitchen one day, she took a detour, found me, and gave a random hug. I wrapped arms around her and felt the puffiness of her winter coat deflate in rhythm to her exhale. She sank into the embrace, rested for a moment, said, "You smell like daddy." Didn't ask her what that meant, but I imagined part fragrance, part strength, part home. And now I'm permanently attached to the existence of non existent random kitchen hugs. I hate it and I accept it. There's a certain kind of sweetness here. I imagine part fragrance, part strength, part home, the longing of. Grieving is the longing of home. Excuse me. Grieving is the longing for home.
Mm. Oh, it's so powerful, Jonathan. Thank you for reading that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I just want to like go with where my psyche is going with all that. I think I'm probably going to miss some of the things that were important to you, but maybe you can highlight those in a moment. The first one is just, and this shows up a lot in your book, but just kind of this concept of emptiness, and then through the grieving process, this relationship that we develop to it. I wonder where you go with kind of those two things, this emptiness and this relationship to the emptiness. What do you think you were trying to communicate?
Yeah, it's a really fascinating thing. The first thing I thought of when you said that was I remember early on reading something, I'm pretty sure it's from an author by the name of Kate Bowler, who wrote something like, some problems can't be fixed, they can only be held.
Mm,
And I remember particularly in my, like, that is almost antithetical to the theology that I was um, preaching. I probably wasn't quite preaching a fixed theology, but basically that's how I've been indoctrinated. And a psychology and the whole philosophy, then it's kind of an American way anyhow of whatever we face, we can overcome it and fix it and move on to the next thing.
right.
So that line that Kate wrote was super helpful for me, and I've carried that with me the whole time. Like, oh, that just gave me the grace and the freedom, which is synonymous, I think, with grace, to just
Mm,
carry this thing and not have to worry about trying to fix it. And so that's what it's felt. It's felt like I've just carried this, and for a while um, it was like a cloak. It was all around me. It was suffocating. But then for a while, it became a little less suffocating and more um, almost life giving. There's the connection to the absence of this person became incredibly important, and it still is. Like the absence is the in some ways the last thing I have of her, and it's something I don't want to let go. It's and I, well, I couldn't let go of it anyhow. I just want to be present to it. So there's something really powerful about that. And then over the years, that absence I was recognizing in so many ways, although I didn't quite have words for it yet, and I probably still don't, though I've tried to put words to it. That absence itself became something of a presence, which was really odd. And the formlessness of it began to form me. The lack of energy began to energize me. And all of this, as you know, is I was really fascinated to find out is really resonates with Richard Boothby's writing and some of his stuff.
yes, so much.
And I
I love
actually,
those connections.
yeah, and I actually, and Richard is, I haven't had a chance to talk to him yet, but my understanding is that he's not necessarily I'm not saying he's an atheist, but I don't think he's a Christian or a overtly religious person. Though there's gradation there. It sounds like from hearing him and reading him, there's movement and change.
Yeah, in fact, I think he would say that through the process of grieving his son's death and going through his own like psychoanalysis and even like a psychedelic experience, and just actually the writing of the book, it opened him up to a type of understanding of the divine, whatever that is, that may not
Yeah.
be far from the ways that I think you describe it in terms of love.
I'd like to think that it's not. I think that there's synergy there, there's resonance, there's
I
harmony
think
there,
so.
and I feel like that doesn't like I think that doesn't devalue people who have a religious faith at all. In fact, when people from other thought streams or perspectives are saying similar kinds of things, I think it only lends value to it. So yeah, I was really fascinated about that. I actually didn't read, I only read a part of his Embracing the Void because some of it was so similar that I didn't want to like read anymore and accidentally appropriate,
Got you.
some of the stuff. But I list him in the end notes because there's definitely something really fascinating about the overplay with all that.
Sure.
So yeah, I don't remember exactly what your question was, but something to do with that absence very much became a presence, and I'm still trying to figure out how to quite articulate it, but it's very much animating who I am and energizing a lot of the ways that I think.
Sure. Sure. Okay, can you help me understand? I'll kind of read this little segment from what you read, and it just really struck me. I'm still trying to like understand exactly, yeah, how to process it. But you write, grieving is redirection of power to give one's impatience a hug, to be powerful in powerless waiting. I think there's a lot there. Where do you want to go with that? That's a really powerful one, I think.
Well, first of all, it's important for me, like the impatient word is important because I have a problem with patience. And I don't mean that just like sometimes when I've noticed over the years, like you get together maybe with friends and, people maybe are vulnerable enough to share some of the stuff that's going on in your life.
Sure.
That's a common one that comes up. It seems almost like acceptable in a lot of our circles to say, "Yeah, I'm a really impatient person."
Yeah, it's almost like a virtue.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a problem for people to say that. What I discovered for me is that actually impatience is has been a really big problem in my life. Of all the like dumb things that I've done, a common denominator that one could find if they went back and unpack that was that I was impatient, that I just wanted to get through it and to fix it, correct it, make the wrinkles go away, get to the solution. And so when I talk about impatience, I try to be like really honest with myself about it. Like it's a problem. And so I'm constantly attempting to give myself grace to just live with this energy that I have that that if I let it go would just control me and manipulate me to want to fix everything and to be impatient. Because being in the middle of a problem is vulnerable. It's not intuitive. It's not well, yeah, I guess intuitive is the right word. It's not it's not where I want to be. It's just not a comfortable place. So grieving very much for me has been an exercise in just living in again this area of like, okay, here's the absence. I can't make that go away. I actually don't want it to go away. I can't fix it. I'm just going to have to carry this thing and to embrace it and to like transcend and include kind of an approach to it. Well, it turns out the more I've been able to do that, that there's real power in living that way. And I don't mean authoritative power, hierarchical power, like I can do more push ups or bench more, but there's this relational energy that seems to be like a core energy in our world in my life that seems to be really really strong. And I think it's true when I watch other people that I'm impressed with, that I like, that I want to be influenced by, that I want to follow. That's the quality that I'm attracted to. I'm not attracted to, and I probably have never really been. I think it was a kind of a fake attraction, but I'm not attracted to people who wield authoritative power. Like I was in athletics some when I was younger, and my kids have always played ball. My youngest still is playing college football now, and so I see it more now because I have language for it. But I've never been attracted to the football coach who, just makes everyone do and yells, and it's such an easy way out. And it's not powerful to me. Real
Right.
power is the internal piece, and I think that's what I'm trying to get at there, like to give that antagonism space to just be a part of who I am, because it is a part of who I am.
Oh, that's great, Jonathan. Man, okay. How about moving in this direction real quick? Because this was one of my favorite parts of the book. Are some of your reflections on the importance of friendship and solidarity in
Mm.
the context of the grieving process, if we can call it that? And one of the lines that I think comes up a few times in your book, and if it's not a few times, I think it just came up so much in my mind that I'm remembering it that way. You talk about the importance of solidarity over solutions. And if I can just speak for a moment personally, one of my life philosophies for a long time, both in my personal life, in the relationships I try to build, and this is really core for my approach to psychotherapy, I always talk about presence over propositions. And I think solidarity over solutions is just another kind of alliteration of that very concept. So, yeah, can you speak to that? What were you getting at when you described the importance of solidarity over solutions in the midst of, the grieving process?
Sure. First of all, I think solidarity over solutions, I may have first heard Father Richard Rohr say. I think I've heard Rob Bell talk about it too. Um, so it's not particularly novel with me. But yeah, so I think that line comes in the friendship chapter, which comes after the chapter where I talk a little bit about all the ridiculous things that people say to you when you go through these absurd things that I've been through in my life and that lots of people have.
Yes.
And I recognize that people say those things not because they necessarily, for example, like everything happens for a reason, or, in the case of a college friend who died and someone said, well, I guess God needed him in heaven more than on earth, or something very anemic like that. I recognize that people, and I've done this too. We all say things we don't necessarily we haven't necessarily thought through them. Like we just don't know what to say, and life is so crazy and chaotic. We're just trying to make meaning out of it, and it's the
Right.
way some people have just been conditioned, indoctrinated, brainwashed, whatever, to make meaning out of certain things. But many of the people who've said asinine things to me, first of all, there's people that also said good things, but
Mm,
many of the people who said asinine things, most of them had good intentions. And what they were
yeah.
really trying to do is they were trying to be friendly and hospitable, and just do whatever they could do to help. And so I felt like, um, as I write about grief, that it would be helpful for others to know, they may not be going through something as intense, but they probably know someone who is. And actually, I could probably retract that statement, because as you and I both know, all of us are carrying stuff that's so heavy. I mean, that's just part of what it
Yes.
means to be human.
Yes.
So we all have friends, we all have acquaintances and people in our lives that need help. And so all that to say, I think the best thing to do is try not to use too many words.
Mm,
Again, try not to be impatient with fixing the thing, and just to enter into relationship with people. And this is resonant with my theology too. This is now how I see my relationship with the divine. I don't think the divine, like in my tradition, the Christian tradition, in the West, it's basically been presented as Jesus. It kind of fixes everything by his death, and it becomes very transactional and atonement. And personally, for me, I'm not trying to be disrespectful for other people who don't think this way, but for me, I don't think that at all anymore. I think that's a nauseating way to look at it. I don't think it's a transactional thing. So I don't think the point is that Jesus died to fix it, but rather that there's something true about a story of someone who may have been divine, who came and entered into it with us and experienced all of this with us. And even at the worst moment on the cross, says, my God, why have you forsaken me? So this is the story of someone who is in solidarity with us. And I could probably play that out a lot more too, the theology piece. But back to the friendship part. So when you have people going through stuff, yeah, I don't think it's your best move to try to solve it for them because you can't, first of all, and even if you could, it's probably going to take several years. And if you're going to be in a relationship with them for several years, it will require you to lay your need to fix things aside and just to be a friend, to be in solidarity. So I think it's super powerful. I'm glad you brought it up. It could really change the whole world if all of us did that. And I've not been good at this in my life, so I'm thankful. I'm not thankful for the particular events that have happened, not the least of which is my daughter dying.
Sure.
But I'm thankful for to be at a place now where I recognize, oh, this is what's going on with me, and I need to be a better human being, and I need to be in solidarity with others, and more than just presenting constant solutions.
Yeah. And when I hear you reflect on my question and process some of these things, I can't help but think about even the concept of listening and how important that is. And I know that can be such a trite word, but if it was really understood, and I'm just picking up on what you were saying in terms of we have to almost give up the need to control the person or have power over or even control their grief process or think that we can fix anything. At its most fundamental level, I think listening is a type of letting go and allowing the person in front of us to have the space they need to just be themselves. And this is why I love talking about it in terms of presence, but I really like solidarity too. It's a way that we embody our humanity in the midst of another person that really lets them be them rather than needing to control or push them in a direction that we feel is best for them.
Yeah, that's said very well. So if people are listening and they can just hit their backward 15-second or backward 30-second little button and hear Kike say that again, I think that's what's going on. Yeah, try to listen. Here's what's fascinating about that too. That's not only good for the person you're in a relationship with, it's good for you. That has
Say more about
been
that. I
that's
agree with you
been
100%.
that's been revolutionary for me. It's not just the best thing for the person going through it because they need to talk, but it is the best thing for you because then it just requires, it just invites you to lay aside your own antagonism and to want to fix it. And you use the word control, huge. We want to control this thing. I mentioned that a little bit in the book too about very similar. All these ideas are so interconnected, but yeah, it became obvious to me real quick that a lot of these things that people say and a lot of things that we do, and I don't mean to just push it off on other people because I've done the same thing, but a lot of times it's like people couldn't deal with the intensity of my problems because it just reminded them of the intensity of their problems.
Right.
And so I just saw again and again and again, and not just with grief, like as my theology shifted, same stuff was coming up, like real quick into a conversation. I could see the body language change, and it had nothing to do with what I was saying as much as what was happening inside of them and the way that they had previously decided on certain presuppositions that led them down the path of a controlling God or whatever. And it just gave them ways to make sense of their life. And then when someone comes along and tries to question it, it becomes too much. And so,
Right.
but the problem is all of humanity is kind of living at that crossroads. I mean, in
Mm.
big geopolitical ways, but also in very personal, intrapersonal ways. And so, yeah, if we could cultivate the ability to listen, it would be helpful for those we are in conversation with, but it would be helpful for us too, which only serves to move the whole thing forward. And we desperately all need to move forward.
Yeah. Oh man, that's really good. Yeah, it's almost like one of the things that's coming up for me in terms of reflecting on how all of this isn't just good for the person we're in solidarity with, but for ourselves is and you see this in Rick Boothby's book on grief. I totally saw it throughout your book, is that in the midst of the loss and as you just reflected on kind of this this sense of emptiness or absence, if you can kind of stay with the trouble and be committed to kind of the ups and the downs, there is a type of reanimation and an enlargement of the psyche that happens. Not any kind of like quick fix mechanical way, but I'm thinking of myself and so many of the clients I've worked with when they've stayed with the darkness with the indigo, they've come out just an expansive person, and it's beautiful to watch actually.
Yeah, it is. And what an honorable thing to enter into as a human being. I mean, what more could you want as a human being? I mean, what, you want to make a bunch of money, you want to have a bunch of
Right.
success. I mean, all of that stuff, maybe serves a purpose at some level, but at the end of the day, to be a more expansive human being, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, totally. Okay, so Jonathan, I know that one of the big ideas or concepts that's important to you, we've actually had conversations offline about this concept of beauty. It comes up a lot in the book. I wanted to kind of share one of the most powerful lines from one of the sections in your book and then just have you maybe kind of riff on it a little bit. You say, what is life if not beauty's pursuit at the edge of the grave? I think that was one of my favorite parts. So beautiful, so powerful. What do you think you meant by that?
Yeah, it's a cool line. I'm really glad I got to write it. I'm probably not the first to write it, but well, that line came as I reflected upon the little story of my wife and I gathering at the gravesite for the first time when the, what do we call it, headstone, the grave marker
Right.
showed up, which was months after the incident. So it was kind of a memorable time, and it was springtime, and the weather was beautiful, and my wife's beautiful, and I'm watching her, arrange flowers around this gravestone, and so much of what's happening inside of me is like, what the expletive does this even matter? I mean, this is just pointless to put uprooted plants around,
Mm,
like this is going to fix anything. And of course, in a utilitarian kind of a sense, it's true, it really doesn't fix anything. But again, as I just gave my impatience a hug and allowed myself to kind of be there, and then later that day and in the subsequent weeks to reflect upon it, I just thought more and more, like there was, like, how, I can't even, like, the words fail me. Like, how beautiful is it for a mom, and that whole scenario of just being present to this human being. And, fathers are connected to their kids. I don't think they're, at some level, they're not cellularly as connected as the
right.
mom. So, yeah, after all of that, I just thought, what's likely happening here is this is just a piece of beauty, and really, what else is there in life? It's we're all at the edge of the grave. I mean, literally, I have no idea how the next hour is going to play out in my life, and none of
Right.
us do. And it's so quick. Even if you get to live 85 years, it goes by in a blink of an eye. So, in some sense, we are all living at the edge of the grave. What else is there other than to, as you mentioned, the word expansiveness, and to pursue like this expansive interior, and to hold these things, and to not try to control people and manipulate, and to allow this beauty to emerge in the midst of it. So I really love that line too, and it meant a lot to me. And beauty in general means a lot to me.
Mm, yeah, that's amazing. What did you mean by separateness is anti-reality? Another kind of great little phrase that popped
Yeah,
up in the book.
yeah, it's back to our relational concept we were talking about earlier. About uh, I'm pretty much committed to, well, I'm committed to the fact that I think the entire cosmos is interactive and entangled and enmeshed. I'm committed to that because
Me too, 100%.
it seems to make the most sense to me experientially. I'm also committed to it because smart people like you say that that makes sense. And other smart people, like our best physicists and our
Right.
best theologians and our best psychologists and our best economists are telling us this over and over in so many ways. They may not use the same language, but that there really is no independent space anywhere. Um, and again, gradations play into effect here. That doesn't mean that
Sure.
there aren't times where individuals have to make choices, or specific entities have to make choices, but you can never really completely absolve yourself of your responsibility of what's happening with others. And you can never really take full credit when things go well either. I mean, we're all just a
Right.
mashup of everything. So when we pretend like we do have the solution and we do have the fix, and that we can stand separate from others and over others, which, I mean, there's a dozen different trails to take here, but what I just thought of when I was saying that was the typical kind of masculine American westernized problem that we have, and that I have, frankly, of not wanting to be associated with the vulnerability and the weakness and the pain and the grief. When we do all of that, we're pretending to be separate from the problem, and that is antithetical to reality. The cognitive dissonance that most, again, masculine, but probably all of us, people in power, enter into daily is either hilarious or pathetic or a combination of both. And for someone like me, who's an American, white, straight, male, relatively affluent compared to the rest of the world, I check a lot of those boxes. And
Hmm.
so
I do too.
it's important to just to be aware of potentially how sinister that can all be. And so separateness equals anti-reality. Yeah, I think it's not being true to what the depth of what's going on.
Sure. Sure. You know what also comes up for me, Jonathan, is this idea that so in the model of therapy that I like to use, they have this phrase condemned isolation, which
Mm.
is there's so much that I could say about it, but what they're trying to get at is that at least for most humans, the greatest pain, the deepest type of suffering is to be separate and isolated and alone from these healthy, life giving relationships. And so I think that's the other side of being so relational is just highlighting that when relationships aren't there, when people are cut off. I mean, you think about one of the worst things that can happen, like in a prison, is solitary confinement, or you hear about prisoners of war and what they go through. I think the fact that humans struggle so much being cut off from others in a life giving way, I think is an almost an argument for the power of or the centrality of these relationships.
Yeah, I do too. I think you're absolutely right. Condemned isolation. That's powerful.
It is very powerful, and to kind of experience people that are in that spot feel that way is heartbreaking. But I think some of the work that you're doing, some of the things that you highlighted in the book are kind of resources for me to reimagine how to work with people and how to help them, kind of get out of that and begin to reconnect and find these life-giving relationships.
That's really cool. I love that that's happening, and I'm thankful for the work that you and people like you are doing. And I think I'll just add to that, like for folks
Sure.
who are listening, well, for me too, the tendency is to think, oh, I got to get over this problem before I can go help someone, or
Right.
before I can go, be a benefit to society, or whatever, however you would finish that sentence. But it's counterintuitive, but really, I think that we're probably doing our best work as humans when we just enter into relationship with others, and we bring, I want to be careful, I guess, bring the entirety of who we are into that relationship. I hesitated there because, if we have some serious mental illness, or, some predispositions towards something violent, that wouldn't be
Sure.
good to bring into a relationship. But I think in general, the idea is don't think of terms of like, oh, I've got to get this fixed before I can go date or before I can go be a better whatever. No, that is how you be a better whatever. You just enter into the problem, and because everything is interconnected. So I
Yeah,
think there's
no,
something helpful in
totally.
that.
There's this great kind of feminist psychotherapy, kind of moving out of more of the classical Freudian kind of tradition, Jean Baker Miller. And she's kind of one of the foremothers of a lot of this relational psychotherapy stuff. And I think she said something like, we grow through and for relationships.
Mm.
Now, but here's the thing: the flip side, and I think this is where some people can be a little bit critical. When we talk about relationships, I don't think we're talking about pie in the sky, kumbaya, everything is easy and happy and fun. I mean, relationships are hard
Yeah.
and very painful, and they're risky in that when you enter into them, really horrible shit like losing a daughter can happen, or losing a parent or a friend. Like it doesn't protect us from the difficulties of life. I just think they're the only way to truly experience what some of these people in these relational psychotherapy movements call zest. That true expansion and enlargement that I think we're really after.
Yeah. Because life is death. Uh,
Yes.
they're they're so symbiotic. You really can't separate the two. Again, that's a move of anti-reality. So I totally agree. The ability, if one can cultivate the ability to enter into thinking about how to die and that they are going to die and that loved ones around them, and not only just physical death, but all the deaths of dreams and
Mm,
relationships and uh, all that's going around all the time. And it sounds morbid, people listening be like, geez. Uh,
right.
and and it might be at some level, but I think also what you're saying is true. Like it's the doorway to zest, and you can't really have life unless you grieve. Someone once said a couple of thousand years ago, "Blessed are those who mourn."
Mm. I wonder who that was.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I can't think of it, but
No, that's awesome. Man, okay, so Jonathan, this has been really fun and cool to connect. I always kind of like to end by making sure that I give, the guests an opportunity to highlight anything that I've missed asking, because I know that I only have my perspective and I read text with a bias and a lens, and I'm pulling out the things that are kind of existentially meaningful to me. And I often know that I miss parts that the author wanted to highlight. So was there anything else about the book, about your story, about what you're currently doing that would be important for you to share on this platform?
no, you did great as usual. You do really good at this, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it. So I think that whatever we missed, it's not a long book. It's only like 12,000 words total, which is kind of funny in and of itself. So uh, I think hopefully, people will read it and they'll come to their own. It'll spark their own ideas and stuff. So whatever I
Yeah.
have to say has already been written down. So hopefully,
Okay.
people will
Well,
pick that up.
let me also give kind of this shout out that, and to you and to the book, this real compliment. You know, given what I do, I end up reading a lot of books on grief, and I for me personally, I find they fall into one or two categories. On the one hand, they tend to be more of the religious kind of talking about the darkness, but then there's always like the resurrection and everything is great at the end and the person's completely transformed. It just seems a little bit too forced, and yours did not feel that way. But then on the opposite end, usually in like non-religious books on grief, there can be this really raw honesty and darkness, which I like, but it doesn't really create any hopefulness, or space for that zest, that reanimation, that enlargement that we've been talking about. And that's just depressing. And I don't think it's quite honest to reality because they're both sides. So I guess the biggest compliment I can give you, if it means anything, is I thought you did a beautiful job of, yes, being raw and honest, and writing things that I think are going to bring a lot of people to tears, but also in a realistic and I think sustainable way, highlighting some real good and beauty and love and positivity that I think is so important in the grieving process. So well done, kind of striking that balance.
Thank you. That's really cool. And I totally relate to what you're saying. Totally. And I've seems like I've spent well, I spent most of my life in the former, constantly getting to the resurrection piece. And so the last 10 years has been a lot in the latter. Yeah, and there are some days where it feels almost like cooler to stay in the latter, like cooler to
Yeah, it's
stay in
like
the
Holy Saturday all the time,
yeah,
and
yeah,
that
yeah,
sounds cool, but I guess my lens is just working with people that are suffering and having gone through my own just really terrible experiences. I don't know. I don't want to be in that space all the time. I want to experience zest.
yeah,
I want to have an enlarged, expansive existence, and that
yeah,
definitely includes the bad and the dark. But
yeah.
my goodness, it's a little bit too biased to just be cynical, I think.
Right, right. So what I think is one way of saying it is there's two questions. One is why do bad things happen? Another is, well, why do good things happen?
Yes. I think that's a great question to kind of wrestle with. How to make sense of, yeah, the good, how to make sense of love.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, Jonathan, thank you again for coming on. I hope this isn't the last time. And yeah, I look forward to just continuing the conversation with you.
Appreciate it so much, man. Thanks for what you're doing. And it's really, really fun to connect on this.
Okay, thank you.
Peace.